I'd like to welcome you to Water, Chicago in the 21st Century and Beyond. I'm Norm Peterson. I'm the Director of Government Relations for Oregon National Laboratory and a representative for the laboratory on the board of the Chicago Council on Science and Technology, or C2ST, as probably everyone knows us by. C2ST is a not-for-profit that brings together Chicago regional scientific leaders from academic institutions, corporations, national laboratories, museums, other cultural attractions, and local and regional governments to provide a forum for the discussion of current issues of scientific interest. In an age when barely 1 in 4 voting adults meet a basic criteria of scientific literacy, we aim to reignite an excitement and passion for science and technology learning and remind Chicagoans of the quality and quantity of research and technology development that takes place in our region. C2ST programs on all sorts of topics in science, math, technology, engineering, all bring researchers out of labs, universities, companies, directly to the public. If you like what you're hearing this evening, please consider supporting C2ST. We're a membership-based organization and rely on your support to present programming such as tonight's. Please see a C2ST representative after the event to learn more about the organization or to join us. City of Chicago has been an innovator in dealing with water issues since its founding, from reversing the flow of the Chicago River to building the Deep Tunnel Project. But the world is increasingly recognizing our relationship with water needs to change. Urbanization, climate change, increased freshwater usage in energy production, intensification of agriculture, aging infrastructure, are all straining our freshwater supplies. Key group of research institutions, civic leaders, business executives, and philanthropists are gathering to lay the foundation for securing the future of this region's water supply and establish Chicago as a place of innovation in the use and reuse of our freshwater resources. The goal of the group is to build on our long history of using transformational technology to address challenging water issues, to create an environment that will treat water not only as a key resource for sustained population growth, but as an economic and industrial driver in a water-constrained future. Tonight's panel will shed some light on this endeavor. Our panelists include Debra, who you saw in the last film clip, who's a commissioner on the board of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. Debra's been a strong advocate for cleaning up the Chicago waterways and for resource recovery, including the reuse of treated water and the generation and use of biogas. Debra serves on the board of the Great Lakes Protection Fund, was the founding editor of the Chicago Wilderness magazine, is an active volunteer restoring prairies and oak woods and forest preserves, and was a founding board member of Friends of the Forest Preserves. She graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the Goucher College in Baltimore with a degree in philosophy and visual arts, and earned a master's degree from Johns Hopkins and Columbia College in Chicago. Our second speaker is Aaron Packman. He's a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at Northwestern. His research focuses on water resources and the interaction of water, sediment, and microorganisms. Important applications of his work include nutrient and carbon dynamics, water quality and contamination, ecosystem degradation and restoration, and waterborne disease transmission. Dr. Packman has received several major awards for his work, including career awards from the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, the Huber Research Prize from the American Society of Civil Engineers, and a Fulbright Distinguished Chair Award for research and teaching at the Politecnico, isn't that good? Di Torino in Italy. Our third speaker tonight is Dr. Seth Snyder, who's a leader of the new water initiative at Argonne. He's developed and worked on leading technology and engineering in renewable energy, water, and energy efficiency technologies. He's a senior fellow in the University of Chicago's Energy Policy Institute at Chicago, or EPIC. He's also a fellow at the University of Chicago's Institute of Molecular Engineering and the Northwestern Argonne Institute for Science and Engineering. He's developed and worked on leading technology and engineering in renewable energy, water, and energy efficiency. His work has resulted in 3 Research and Development 100 awards and a Federal Laboratory Consortium Award for Excellence in Technology Transfer.
We have seen nothing like this river that we enter as regards its fertility of soil, its prairies and woods, its cattle, elk, deer, wildcats, bustards, swans, ducks, parakeets, and even beaver. There are many small lakes and rivers. That on which we sailed is wide, deep, and still for 65 leagues. In the spring and during part of the summer, there is only one portage of half a league. And what they had encountered, of course, was the rich and varied topography left by the retreat of the last glacier roughly 14,000 years ago. And as that glacier receded northward, it not only scoured the landscape, leaving glacial ridges and moraines, leaving giant ice cubes that as they melt create prairie potholes, but it also left a very great lake. And as Joel Greenberg has written in his Natural History of the Chicago region, the force of the glacier ordained that the Chicago region would straddle the eastern continental divide, separating the drainage area of the Atlantic Ocean from that of the Gulf of Mexico. The Des Plaines River, the Fox River, the Kankakee River, and their tributaries lie in the Illinois and Mississippi watershed. The Chicago River and the Calumet flowed into the Great Lakes. And so what this image shows in that wavy line down the center is that eastern subcontinental divide. And there's still markers in Oak Park, for instance, that show where that is. It's not very high, but it separates these 2 major watersheds. But those smudges that you see in the lake are pollution, because Chicago in the 1860s and 70s was teeming with people, bustling with activity, industry was booming, the Union stockyards had opened in 1865, and people dumped all manner of human and animal and industrial waste and garbage directly into the river, which flowed into Lake Michigan. And the reason I put this image up is that it shows there's very little circulation of the currents in Lake Michigan at the southern tip, where our predecessors were dumping all this waste. Waterborne illnesses like cholera and typhoid and fever and dysentery caused many deaths because people drew from this pollution-laden lake for their drinking water. At the same time, Chicago was building its first public water supply system with intakes near the shoreline, but there was no water treatment until the 1930s. And so increasing concerns about public health led to the establishment of the Chicago Sanitary District in 1889, charged with protecting the drinking water supply for city residents. And these images just show some of that contaminated river flowing into the lake. This was the first water tower pumping station, but not a treatment facility, and the very busy industrialized lakefront at that time. It's been said that all problems started out as solutions, and I suspect the engineers in this room will appreciate this. The solution to the problem of Chicago's contaminated drinking water was to construct 2 major channels to direct the flow of the Chicago River into the Des Plaines River and divert waste away from Lake Michigan. The sanitary district dug the 28-mile sanitary and ship canal between 1889 and 1900. Locks located near Lake Michigan and at Lockport diverted the flow of the north branch of the Chicago River, the south branch, and the main stem into the canal and then on to the Des Plaines River. The completion of the 8-mile North Shore Channel in 1910 connected Lake Michigan at Wilmette Harbor with the north branch of the Chicago River, allowing the use of lake water to flush sewage from the northern suburbs downstream. Put another way, the solution to pollution was dilution. In 1922, the 16-mile Cal-Sag Channel was constructed between Blue Island and the Sag Bridge to link the Little Calumet River to the Sanitary and Ship Canal. Mind you, these massive engineering projects were essentially open sewage pipes built to convey human and animal waste and all manner of garbage downstream. They were man-made channels dug where no waterways had existed previously. And through human agency, our energy, our capital, and our invention, we reversed a mighty river. By the 1920s, more modern processes of sewage treatment had been developed, and the sanitary district began to build sewage treatment plants in Cook County. So we no longer dump raw sewage into the rivers. Now we send our human waste to 7 wastewater treatment plants that have the capacity to treat 1.5 billion gallons a day of residential and industrial wastewater, serving the equivalent of 10 million people. And today, 70% of the flow in the Chicago waterways is the discharge of treated wastewater, what we call effluent, coming from the district's treatment plants. And so this shows these man-made canals and no longer the smudges of pollution in the lake. But by reversing the Chicago River, we created 2 new problems. First, we made a conduit between Lake Michigan and the Mississippi River that did not exist in nature. So that today we're spending millions of dollars to try to prevent invasive species, especially the Asian carp, from traveling up the Mississippi and Illinois rivers and entering the Great Lakes, where it is likely they will decimate the sport and commercial fishery. And we broke the natural hydrologic cycle, changing the shape of the Lake Michigan watershed and creating what is known as the Chicago diversion. Today, we take close to 1 billion gallons of water a day from Lake Michigan for residential and industrial use, and we return almost none of it. And all the rain that falls on the landscape, on this kidney bean shape of that map, still makes its way into rivers and streams, but no longer replenishes Lake Michigan because we reverse the river. And so this very narrow strip is what remains inside the Lake Michigan watershed in Illinois today, meaning that the rain that falls on that portion of the landscape will make its way back into the lake. So we take water, this precious liquid asset, out of the lake, we essentially use it once, and then we throw it away, sending it to the Gulf of Mexico, where the nutrients from our Cook County waste help to create a dead zone, empty of aquatic life. No wonder we call it wastewater. And I ask you, how smart is that? How smart is it to treat the substance on which all life depends as if it were garbage? So here's a little bit about the situation we face today. We live in a very urbanized landscape. It's estimated that 42% of Cook County is impervious surface, meaning we've given rainwater nowhere to go. And this is what's happening in my neighborhood. I live in Skokie, and just up the street, a home built in the 1950s was torn down, and a larger home built on the same lot, but occupying a larger built footprint, and thus displacing more rainwater because of the larger impervious surface, into the same size pipe laid down the middle of the street in the 1950s. And we know what happens when a pipe fills up. It either is going to back up into our basement or overflow directly into a nearby river or stream. This is the aerial view of that expanded footprint. And the larger house is displacing 50,000 more gallons a year during rainstorms. And that's just one teardown, and there have been 4 such teardowns on my block alone. We also are experiencing more intense rain events. Last August 22nd, Midway Airport experienced 3.62 inches of rain in 40 minutes. And for the year, the weather station at Midway had 10 inches more rainfall than the weather station at O'Hare. And so, not surprisingly, we're experiencing a lot of flooding, causing property damage, immense anguish, and a lot of problems. This is where I live, a pretty modest single-family home in Skokie with a large asphalt driveway. And my partner and I wanted to rip up the driveway and replace it with gravel or a permeable surface that would allow the rain to infiltrate and recharge our underground water supply. And there's a calculation you can make to show how much rain runs off. And we figure we could save between 9,000 and 10,000 gallons a year if we converted our asphalt driveway to a permeable one. And I wanted to try to show what does 10,000 gallons a year look like. And so this is what it looks like. And that's just the driveway. More recently, I calculated the rainfall on the roof as well as the driveway and our own annual water use. And if we could capture and store and filter the amount of rain falling on our roof and driveway alone, it would equal 125% of our annual water use. But we don't have a way to do that. So the challenge that lies before us is this, that we begin to think about and talk about stormwater as drinking water. That every time you think about stormwater management, change the term to drinking water management. Every time we talk about managing stormwater, talk about managing drinking water. Because the task before us is nothing less than a dramatic change in the way we think about and talk about our freshwater resources. Today, we treat rainwater as a nuisance, to be gotten rid of, instead of as a resource to be used productively. 125 years ago, in part because it was the cheapest alternative, we reversed a river and saved a city. We dug miles of canals to convey sewage downstream and to carry barge traffic on inland waterways to a bustling city. No one ever imagined that one day people would canoe or kayak on these waterways. No one envisioned that these open sewer pipes could become part of a vibrant metropolis for the 21st century, that the number of fish species would increase, that endangered black-crowned night herons would make a home here, that people would no longer turn their backs to the water, but see it as an amenity and as an attraction. The river has been called the artery, running through the heart of the city. Yet are we not diminished as a people if we continue to treat our rivers as a garbage dump and our water as a waste product? Happily, the old sanitary district is changing, now moving swiftly into resource recovery, installing disinfection technology at 2 of the largest plants to kill more of the bacteria and other pathogens that remain in the treated water. And this will improve water quality for recreational use and go online next year. You and I are enormously lucky. Through the accident of birth or the exercise of volition, we live near and have access to one of the world's great natural resources. But as such, it's incumbent upon us to demonstrate wise stewardship of this precious, irreplaceable liquid asset, our fresh water. It's a strategic asset, it's an economic asset, and it's the foundation of a healthy environment. The sustainable cities of the future will be those that are most successful at changing the culture, that make the transition from stormwater to drinking water, from wastewater to liquid asset. Thank you.
To start, I have a photograph from the International Space Station of our region, and I think it makes it very clear immediately that we're not only talking about Chicago as a city here. If you look at this image, you can see the only dark spot on the Earth is the lake. Surrounding the lake, particularly on the southern shore of Lake Michigan, you have quite a large illuminated area centered around the city of Chicago, but extending regionally. So what we're really talking about here is the development of a megacity around the southern edge of Lake Michigan. This has been discussed or proposed as a critical concept in terms of the United States developing a number of megaregions. So this is beyond the city scale, even beyond what you may think of as megacities, connected areas that have common features. And it's been proposed that the Great Lakes megacity has a hub in Chicago. So you can see there that we have a number of cities connected together in a regional framework along the Great Lakes and also outside the Great Lakes. So this extends over into the Mississippi River system, connecting a number of upper Midwest cities. So the challenges we face here are not only local challenges, but truly they're regional challenges and international challenges because it extends into Canada. This can be made very clear if we look at a map of the big picture in terms of the water systems in the upper part, the northern part of the United States. So this shows in brown the US part of the Great Lakes water system. So as Debra said, everything in brown here is where precipitation falls, it would run into the Great Lakes. And the green and the gray are the Mississippi River drainage system. So you can see that Chicago is exactly located at the intersection of these two systems, naturally. This was really the connection point between the Great Lakes and the upper Mississippi. Now, as Debra mentioned also, there's a continental divide here, and it's shown in this dotted line, the interface between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River systems. So when we say continental divide, probably this area doesn't spring to mind. You probably think of something that looks like this, where it's very easy to see that water that falls on this ridge in the Rocky Mountains to the left would run to the west out to the Pacific Ocean. And if it's on the right side of that ridge, it'll go into the Missouri River system and then the Mississippi River system and come out in the Gulf of Mexico. But in fact, we do have a continental divide here, and it looks like this. This is Oak Park, all right? So it looks very flat, but because of this glaciation of the area that Debra referred to, we have a very shallow continental divide here, right? I think it's useful to think about this also in the broader context of how water is connected and flows through the Great Lakes. So on the top, you can see an illustration of the elevations and depth of the Great Lakes. And we probably normally think of this also as flat, but actually there's a set of steps as you go down through the Great Lakes with water flows generally from the west to the east and ultimately going out the St. Lawrence Seaway. Okay? But we are here in Chicago exactly at the southern tip of Lake Michigan. And we are here because through the Great Lakes system, you have a connection to the Atlantic Ocean. So the St. Lawrence Seaway is one of the most important shipping channels on Earth. And this provided access to the interior of the United States that supported substantial development. Now, if we compare the Great Lakes, you can see just by looking at their volumes and predictions of their average storage times of water, that you have a tremendous variability across the lakes. And the main thing to notice here is that Lake Michigan is the second biggest lake and has the second longest water storage time. So anything that we put into Lake Michigan will stay around for hundreds of years. And we're at the southern tip of Lake Michigan, so this is the same schematic that Debra showed. We're at the very end, the southernmost end of this large water system. The currents have been well mapped, and we know that there's a longshore current comes around the lake, and this is what's called a gyre, circulation in the lake. So wastes that come anywhere on the western shore of Lake Michigan tend to propagate down to the end of the lake and around to the other side. We can readily see this in, for example, satellite images of sediment propagation. So you can see after a storm that you have a large accumulation here of sediment around Chicago, and then this will go over into Indiana and Michigan and either deposit in the gyre or propagate northward again. So we're in a system that tends to circulate contaminants and retain them at the southern end of Lake Michigan. We can also think about, well, what did this landscape look like before the city was built here? It's something we don't normally think about. Well, this image on the top shows Portage Creek, which is the very place that Marquette and Joliet crossed from the Des Plaines River system into the Chicago River system. And famously, Chicago was built on a swamp. So this is something like what it looked like before there was a city here. Very low-lying, very wet, and it's pretty clear if you put people here, if you have waste here, it doesn't really have anywhere to go. So there's obviously a major challenge here if you're trying to live in this area to avoid basically drinking your own waste. Right, so what was done, there should be two things here. But what was done, and you can see underneath, is the whole city was raised, in fact. The whole city was raised up by a couple of meters, by several feet, in order to provide drainage, so that everything we see in the city, everything we're standing on, everything all the buildings are built on here is artificial, built up. And you can see this if you drive around the shoreline and you look from the lakeside. So the top image is a view of Chicago from Northwestern, the bottom image is a view of Chicago from the south, and everything you see in terms of the lakeshore is artificial. So we're living essentially in a completely artificial environment, and this was built specifically to try to get the wastewater out of the city. Now, a consequence of this that Debra mentioned is that you could have contamination, and so there was water systems built, intakes that were placed out in the lake to try to get access to fresh water. So this shows, in addition to the map of the city, the connections to the water intakes that you can still see out in the lake today. And this helps. This definitely helps, that you get access to fresher water from farther away. But if we consider that drainage pattern again, we have this discharge of water at that time just out the Chicago River, contaminating the lakefront. This is a picture in the 1880s. So most of this infrastructure in the city, the sewers, the water intakes, that was built from around 1850 to 1880. And at this time, there was tremendous concern about waterborne disease. Right, so remember, this is just the time when Pasteur's germ theory of disease was established. And you had a tremendous public concern, as illustrated by this etching, which shows death pumping water, the idea of pumping water containing cholera bacteria. And at this time, there was tremendous pressure, I think, to avoid this contamination and recycling of waterborne disease. So this is exactly why the canals were built, right? So the simple idea to quit recycling waterborne disease through our water intakes in the lake, deliver that wastewater instead to the west through these canals out to the Illinois and then the Mississippi River system. So I think Debra clarified the infrastructure quite well. I want to emphasize the engineering aspects here, which is that these construction projects were truly enormous. So this set of images compares various canals. So the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal is bigger than the Panama Canal, bigger than the Suez Canal. These are truly enormous investments over decades in making sure that we could get rid of our wastewater. All right, so if we look at the consequences of that today, this gives a picture of the current inputs and diversions of water from the entire Great Lakes system. The single largest removal of water from the Great Lakes is in Chicago. So overall, the inputs of water to the lakes by us, by people, are about balanced. But the biggest withdrawal is here. And this is emphasized if we just look at the picture for southern Lake Michigan, comparing these river inflows from Milwaukee all the way up to Muskegon. And we have, as Debra mentioned, 1 billion gallons of water per day removed at Chicago, taken out of the system. and delivered to the Mississippi coming out in the Gulf of Mexico. So, these are small numbers relative to the total volume of the lake, but it has substantial implications for material that is recycled in the system, for disease, for nutrients, and for contaminants. Right? So that's the current picture in terms of what we've done to the lakes. Well, what are the current concerns? Debra mentioned invasive species. This just amplifies that. If we look at the same picture of this divide at Chicago between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River systems, there's quite a lot of organisms that were concerned about migrating either direction. So Asian carp is clearly the flagship one in terms of concern about getting into the lakes, but there are many other species we're concerned about moving from the Mississippi to the lakes, and conversely from the lakes into the Mississippi. And because we have this large diversion, this artificial connection at Chicago, we're in the crosshairs for the debate about invasive species migrating between the Great Lakes and Mississippi. So this has driven some ideas that these systems that were historically separate should be separated again. All right? Another major issue of concern today is waterborne diseases again. These diseases haven't gone away. They're still a major problem worldwide and potentially here. So these images show an algal bloom that occurred in Lake Erie. It actually occurs persistently in Lake Erie. But the images on the right show the major bloom that occurred last summer. And this is in the drinking water supply for the city of Toledo. So I would ask you, does that look like water that you would want to drink, right? So this is known to occur because of nutrient contamination of the lakes, because of this sort of recycling, and then growth of harmful organisms. So these are the kind of things that, in terms of the Great Lakes overall, there's quite a bit of concern, and that we want to make sure does not happen in Chicago. The other major issue that I think is on everyone's mind is the effects of climate change. And it's useful to think of the difference between climate and weather. Climate is what we expect, and weather is what we get. So it's a little bit hard to interpret climate in terms of isolated events. But what's expected for climate change is that we have increasing variability in water inputs, in precipitation. And we've seen some of the effects of this. If you just go year by year, we had a major drought in 2012. We had major flooding in 2013. We had this horrible winter last year where 80% of the entire Great Lakes surface area froze, which really had never happened before. So these are not isolated events. These are things that we expect to occur and to keep occurring and to occur with greater frequency going forward. So this is illustrated by the map I've shown here, which is from the Center for Neighborhood Technology, that illustrates insurance claims for flooding in the Chicago area. So there are regions that persistently flood and has a very large human impact, health impact, and economic impact. So these are real concerns for management of water in this area going forward. Further, if we look at the bigger picture in terms of climate, this is a map that shows projections of increased flooding risk nationwide. And you can see that there are places where we do expect to see increased flooding going forward. You can't interpret this as looking at every point on the map, but generally speaking, around the southern parts of the Great Lakes, we expect to see increasing precipitation, very intense, that will give us more problems with flooding going forward. Now, many people think, well, if it rains more, we should have more water. But that's not necessarily the case. The reason is because of the timing of the water. So this is historical records for Lake Michigan and Lake Superior over the last 50 plus years, and it shows for about 10 years there was considerable drop in the lake levels. In fact, there were record lows in both Lake Superior and Lake Michigan a couple of years ago. This is actually from a paper last year, and the data are from up till 2013, so this really reflects the climate change, increasing temperatures and drought. And then, of course, we did get a lot of water input, so this went back up, but the projection is that the lakes will warm because of climate change. So the major issue in terms of Great Lakes water levels with climate is increasing warming that will give us increasing evaporation. And this has been addressed exactly in this paper. So this shows the full set of data records. The top one is temperature, the brown one's in the middle, or evaporation over the lake, and the bottom one is the same water level data that I showed. So it's well established, if we looked at the recent past, when conditions are warmer, when it's brighter, sunnier, warmer, we get more evaporation, and this leads to lowering of the lake levels. So it's quite possible under climate change, we could get more flooding and lower lake levels. So these are both things that we need to guard against in terms of future infrastructure investments. All right, so that's kind of my summary of where we came from, what we've done, where we're going, what the prospects look like for the future. And the main thing I would ask you to think about here is, if we compare these two images, do we want to be the one on the left where we look at water as a beautiful, bountiful resource, and we're excited about the natural systems that we have, find efficient ways to use water productively? Or do we want to risk this future where we're driving blindly into rising floodwaters and take on the risks of projected future climate without preparation? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Seth Snyder. Nice to meet you all. This is something that we thought about last summer, and I'm glad it finally came. And as soon as Dr. Striesheim approached me, he said, let's do a panel on water, I thought I would love to speak after I hear what Debra Shaw's vision is, and I think she's a wonderful speaker, and I really learn a lot every time I hear her speak. And Aaron Packman, somebody I've been working very hard with recently to try to get things going. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about the history and where we are. I mean, our previous speakers know that very well, and basically what the environment is. I'm going to talk about where we're going. And I'm going to do it from a different context. I don't have the ability to stay on task. I always go rogue, and that's just how I do it. So first of all, I'm from a place called Oregon National Laboratory. It's about 25 miles from here. It was founded in Chicago as the first Department of Energy National Lab. I think pretty much everybody here knows Oregon National Lab. This is a friendly audience, I hope. I mean, I speak a lot of places. They ask, is that in Oregon or something like that? But no, we're right down the road. We have 3,400 employees. We bring over $700 million to our economy every year, and a significant fraction of the people live in the city or live in Cook County, and some live farther out in DuPage and Will County, but it's a real economic driver for the region. We work with a lot of companies, and we have three themes. We work on energy, we work on environment, and we work on national security. All things that, if we do well, will benefit the country and benefit the region. So what are we here to talk about? And we've heard several things. I'm going to jump more into opportunities and what's going on there. But this is a standard slide I use talking about water, is that there's a whole lot of water in the world. If I have an uninformed audience, a little 3%, we heard that before, is fresh water. If we break that down, most of that is in the glaciers. And if we're right, this may become available very quickly, but I don't think we can. we don't want to build a future based on rapid access to glaciers. 30% is groundwater. Some of it is very deep, some of it is brackish and all, and that's actually, and some of it, and I'll talk later, is actually very slow to recover. So it's not something we want to depend on very largely on groundwater. We think about surface water, and that's 0.3% of 3%. So that's a small amount, and somebody else can do the math. Of that, lakes are the major source, and as we've heard before, the Great Lakes are 20% of this. So this is we have a big part of a very small pie, and this is what we all depend on. Life built up around where water is. It always has, and what we're saying is that the future is that instead of saying, how do we get water to where people are, let's say, let's bring people to where the water is. So that's what this is actually all about. So why are we here? Why am I from an energy lab, an energy research lab, talking about water? Well, because water is the new energy. This is something we're all recognizing, is that if you look at development around the world, you could look at the U.S., water is a major driver for the success of societies, for the success of economies. Of the World Economic Forum, they meet in a little tiny ski resort called Davos. They just came out with a report about 2 weeks ago, and they consider water as the highest priority in terms of impact of crises over the next decade. So this is something that people thinking on a global level see as potential for substantial risk. And as Mark Twain said, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. And we actually are in a very good position here. So we've heard this before about the Great Lakes and all. I'm not going to go into this. We've heard it twice before, but I have this slide in every talk I do. So what are we talking about? One of the things why water and energy is because water and energy are linked. And this is, I talked to my neighbors, I talked to different people, and Commissioner Shaw showed her neighborhood and their relationship with water. People don't really understand water, and water and energy are very closely linked. And so if I look at this pie chart here, this came out about 3 weeks ago. U.S. Geological Survey does a survey. Where do we use water in the U.S.? And right now, I'm beating 2010. So right now, 5 years ago, 45% of water withdrawals are used for power plant cooling. So we think of water as something we drink, and we absolutely want to do that. But if we think of water at a macro scale, we have to think about where we use it. And 45% is for power plant cooling. So we cannot think about water and energy separately. We have to think about them together, and that's why we're here tonight. One of the things that's important besides that is that we consume 12% of the electricity in the U.S. is for the water sector, for treating water, as Commissioner Shaw talks about with MWRD, for desalinating water, and you'll see in a second, for conveying water over long distances. And so we have a crisis out west. And so our story is this, and I could just jump to the end, is don't move the water to the people. Move the people to the water, or very simply, don't go west, young man. Don't go west, young woman. Come back to Chicago. That's what we're saying here. And this is, we think, is an opportunity for a really big future. This is what we're going for. So what are this water for energy, energy for water? So here's energy for water. If we want to take a fresh water, Jardine is probably a half mile from here, next to Navy Pier. It takes almost no energy to gauge that water. You just use a little gravity and all. If we want to go out to California, so this is San Diego, right off the harbor in San Diego. They are building the Western Hemisphere's largest seawater desalination plant. That will actually be, the largest plant will serve 10% of the demand for the city of San Diego. By the way, 90% of their water is at risk because it's imported from snowpack runoff from Northern California. That's not North California Avenue, that's Northern California. So 90% of their water supply is at risk. They have this as a $1 billion project to meet 10% of that demand. And the expectation is when you look at climate change, that snowpack is going to go away in our children's lifetimes. So they going to have to meet 100% of the demand, or they can move back to Chicago. Other options we look at besides seawater desalination, so that's importation. These are both very high energies. That's a kilowatt hour per million gallons. And I know what the cost of water is here, and I know Commissioner Shaw does, and I'm sure Professor Packman does, but I bet you most people in the audience don't know what water costs. Does anybody know how much water costs in Chicago? Nobody ever knows. It's maybe $3.50 a 1,000 gallons. Which is, you could say is high or low, but that's approximately what it is. Some places like Central California that are total drought, it's cheaper, but that's not sustainable. Some places like Boston, which has a lot of water, it's more expensive. So there's a big disconnect, but ultimately we will have to pay the price, and we pay the price through energy. On the other side is water for energy. So I mentioned a few minutes ago, power plant cooling is 45% of water withdrawals in the U.S. It's not consumption of water withdrawals. We need a reliable water supply if we want to generate power. This is in northern Alabama on the Browns Ferry nuclear plant. It's on the Tennessee River. It actually had a shutdown in the summer of 2010 because the actual river water was so warm that they couldn't operate the plant. They wound up having to purchase energy to supply to their customers, cost them about $50 million. And after the end of the incident, they put in an air cooling, which is a much more expensive process to basically manage it so it doesn't happen in the future. So this is what a future looks like when we talk about climate change. So together, folks like me and Oregon National Lab and the 17 national labs, we put together a report with the Department of Energy. It's called the Water Energy Nexus Report. Nice long URL, but if you do a search for Water Energy Nexus, you'll find this report. It's about a 300-page report. It goes through everything that I'm discussing in far more knowledge and far more detail. But in that, they looked at today's system. In terms of just the energy sector, about 3/4 of the water we use is for is fresh water, in the energy systems, 3/4 of the water that is used is freshwater systems. Their goal is to get that down under half. Under half instead of 3/4. And this is a report, this is, Department of Energy's experts. So they looked at where those opportunities are. And what we see, and I talk to my typical person, they'll say, yeah, we're going to do lots of seawater desalination. When you do the analysis, as they did, they see seawater desalination because of the high energy costs. That's 7% here, it's going down to 5%. That is not a solution for energy, for water for energy. They do see that for brackish water, which is water, underground aquifer water, because it takes a lot of energy to get that to the quality you need. Where is that opportunity? That big opportunity is in dry cooling and in reclaimed water. And what has Commissioner Shaw been talking about right from the start? Reclaimed water. There is no better place to do reclaimed water than right here. So this is a solution we're talking about long-term for water stability, which will also lead to energy stability. So how do we go about this? We see this as an analysis component. We are doing very detailed levels analysis, includes things like climate change models, looking at hydrology. What is the water supply going to look like? We are working on things like demand analysis. There's groups in the city that have looked. This is what the future looks like for demand for water. We're looking in a different way. What is the potential demand? So we're doing that, looking at the analysis. We develop technologies. This is just a cartoon of a membrane for treating water. And we're trying to put that into smart infrastructure. Does anybody know where this picture is? Aaron, do you know where this is? No. Anyway, this is a treatment plant in Israel. And I look back to Israel a lot because Israel is a very water-starved country, and they actually recover about 90% of their wastewater for reuse. The next closest country is Spain with about 20%. The US is probably about 1%. It can be done and so that's what we're aiming towards. So what we're trying to do at Oregon is that we're trying to build off of this long history of Chicago innovating and advancing technology in water. And we have three main themes: the system analysis, what should we do? Treatment technologies, which I mentioned, and then some on detection, how do we monitor? So I'm just going to go through quickly a couple example projects of many projects going on in the area. Here's an analysis project. This is my colleague, John Murphy. This is for Tucson. He did an analysis. If you start changing prices in water, in Tucson, Arizona, and many of you have been to Tucson, there's no water there. You change the price of water in Tucson, Arizona, it does not change behavior at all. People do not change how much they use. Nobody knows how much water costs. So you raise the price, it doesn't make a difference. It takes a different sort of social thought. So this is telling us we can't use a traditional economic model. It's like raise the price, people will use less. We need to do modeling, we have to understand decisions, and price is not a complex enough trigger. So we need to do more than that. So we're doing a lot in analysis. We're looking at treatment technologies. This is the largest wastewater treatment plant. It's the Stickney plant operated by the Water Reclamation District. It's right near on the other side of the highway from Midway Airport. We're working on anaerobic digestion technology. This is technology that takes the sludge from the wastewater, it recovers the energy and will eventually recover the nutrients and basically makes it cheaper to provide treated wastewater. So when we take our technology and we apply it to a wastewater treatment plant, that treated wastewater suddenly can become cheaper. Now we have a way to provide non-potable water instead of using potable water. That's a way to do that, where we're saving that precious water of the lake for residential use, and those non-potable things, it could be power plant cooling, it could be metal processing, we start using non-potable water. And this is a lot of water. This is a billion gallons a day, we heard. So that's a lot of water. We can serve a lot of the industry we need. We're working on ways to polish and clean up water. This is a technology we have about 10 patents on, so that we can provide that power plant on the industrial water with the right water quality based on the water coming in. So we're working on basically engineering technologies with membranes. We're working on detection technologies. This is my colleague Z.T. Liu, and he's looking at something on ways of dating water. We have a very prominent source At Oregon, it's called the Advanced Photon Source. We have other ways of detecting. We look at isotopes, and basically how long they're underground will tell you, the isotope ratio will tell you how long that water's underground. And it tells you whether you want to tap that supply or not. So we're looking to age water. And the last project I'll tell you about is that we're working directly with the Water Reclamation District. As they disinfect, we actually have a series of environmental engineers that are going and sampling the water. We're doing a biological technique called metagenomics, where we're looking at that environmental DNA of all the microbial samples, and we're trying to determine, as the district does disinfect, what does that do to that population? We want to be able to validate, monitor, and eventually validate that that disinfection is improving the quality. And then it gets down to the question, will we be able to swim in the Chicago River? I certainly hope we can. And we're trying to do, if them taking the lead in terms of doing the technology, we're just trying to make sure that it does right. So that's a kind of a quick sampling of what we're doing in here. And so in my vision is this. We have a great city here. We have an ongoing relationship with water, and I think that state of this union is really strong. And this one here is the one in the middle is my daughter, the one on my left is my nephew, and the one on the right is my brother. And I think you all see the scene. So I think that we have a lot of opportunity to do good. We're going to bring the engineering, the technology, as long as the leadership from the public side and the research community, and really create an economy that generations from now people look back and we hope will say, hey, Chicago's a great city, and this is one of the reasons, is because of the water. Thank you.
So this is now opened up to you. Questions, comments? Art.
Well, thank you all. Most informative and very well done. I really appreciate it. And my question is about Chicago. I'm sure in the various studies that are being done, that have been done, there are various scenarios that are assumed for the purpose of projecting the future. My question has to do with the population, that is the numbers of people that live in this area, and how does population growth factor into all of the things being equal? In other words, if we assume business as usual, what's the level of population where we can sustain ourselves, or we reach a danger level of some sort?
All right, so I can start on that. The question was, what is the effective population growth in the region and where can we go? So obviously more people means you need more water and more waste. So it amplifies all the issues that we're talking about here. Exactly what the limit is, that's a little bit hard to say, because our use of the water is regulated. So it's not how much water is there, it's how much can we use. All right. So there are a complex set of issues there, particularly with who's using water from the lake and where would people live, all right? And I think I'll turn it over to Debra there, because
so I don't know a number. The amount Chicago can withdraw from the lake is capped at 3,200 cubic feet per second by a Supreme Court decree. That said, there is enormous potential for available water through conservation. In this region, people use 150 to 200 gallons per capita per day. It's up to 400 when you include irrigating lawns. In California, they brought it down in some places to 70 gallons per capita per day. So through installing low-flow toilets, low-flow shower heads, a whole host of measures, we have a lot of room to grow within our current limits. And then if we reuse treated water for some industrial purposes instead of potable water, we have even more. So that's not my worry in this region.
And kind of in support of that, if we look at how many times we reuse water, I was asked that a question. I was at a dinner about a month or two ago with the Nature Conservancy. What are your goals in this? I would say that we use every drop of Chicago water. Of Lake Michigan water. We go from basically 1 point whatever it is, 0.05 or 1.02, and get it up to 2 and get it up to 5, and then that basically provides that water is not a limitation to the area. And that's really what we're aiming for. One of the things that in the front end, as we build this program, we want to do that analysis. How big? How can we? What is our sustainable limit? In terms of water, and we think it's going to be big, but I can't put a number yet because we have not done that analysis yet.
We'll go there, and could you just identify yourself, please?
You need to speak really loud because I'm hearing challenged.
Sure, wastewater treatment is extremely energy intensive. How does Chicago compare efficiency-wise with other U.S. cities as far as how well it's doing with its carbon footprint in wastewater treatment? What are its specific goals for energy reduction, and what are you specifically doing project-wise to reach those goals?
I'm not sure I heard everything, but I'll give it a try. Yes, the Water Reclamation District is one of the largest energy users around. We used to spend $50 million a year on electricity. There's a lot of pumping and blowing of large volumes of water that are part of the treatment process. The good news is the district is on a path to become energy neutral in 9 years. And we're going to do a lot of that through the generation, capture, and reuse of biogas, the methane that's generated in the treatment process. So this year at the Calumet treatment plant, which is on the south side of Chicago at 130th and Torrance, that has an average daily flow of about 300 million gallons a day, we will divert 440 tons of food waste a day from city solid waste, convert it into a slurry, feed it into the anaerobic digesters, increase our gas production by 160%, and on the back end, scrub some of that and sell it back into the natural gas pipeline. That will bring us to about 40% energy neutral. We're going to put out an RFP for the Stickney plant, the largest, that has 5 times the digester capacity as Calumet. I'm told that we could accommodate all of the food waste from Cook County into that plant. We'll increase our gas production and either produce biofuel, electricity, or gas. I don't know how they'll do it yet. That will bring us to 70% energy neutral. And through some other changes in our processing, we hope to be zero. We're becoming a power center instead of a waste center. And that's renewable energy because it's feeding organic waste and human waste to produce methane and to capture it and use it.
And in support of that, the EPA actually qualifies biogas from wastewater treatment plants as a cellulosic fuel. That's something that basically was, the policy was changed in July of 2014, which means as they capture that biogas and put it in the pipeline and reuse it, they can get what are called RINs, which are cellulosic fuel credits, and actually they can be worth as much as the actual energy itself. So it's actually a way that the district will not only save energy, but they will save significant amounts of money.
It's a little bit hard to hear the audience question in this room, and I hate to change the format of this right in the middle. But if you do have a question, please come over here to where this microphone is. That way everyone can hear the questions, and the panelists will have an easier time too.
It's probably better to use that because it's...
While people are assembling, I do want to ask Commissioner Shore a question. What's your vision, for where MWRD is going? How are you going to move into reuse? How are you going to get this all done?
So, thank you, Seth. And part of the reason I'm here is that I've been pushing to move the district into reuse of our treated water, that we all know it makes sense to use water more than once. And in many places where water's more scarce, they're already doing this. In San Antonio, one of the largest users of their treated wastewater is Toyota, that uses it in a manufacturing plant. So we're beginning to look at that in the vicinity of our Calumet plant. Here, the two obstacles are that drinking water is still cheaper, even with the recent increases in the cost, still cheaper than any other major city in the country. And the delivery system, namely the pipes for that drinking water, is already in place. And it costs money to lay pipes. But if we look at a radius close to our treatment plants, 2, 3, 5 miles nearby, we can lay that pipe, attract the water-intensive industry of the future, know that they have a guaranteed, available, high-quality source of water in the treated wastewater, and we may be able to provide renewable energy too. So that's what we're looking at with water reuse. I mentioned the generation, capture, and reuse of biogas. We're also have an exciting process to capture phosphorus, a nutrient essential for growing plants, but a pollutant in waterways. We're going to take phosphorus out of the treated wastewater at the Stickney plant and turn it into a slow-release fertilizer that we can sell that's not water-soluble, producing something in the Midwest that can be used in the Midwest. So there's a whole host of things that are underway that's going to make these water reclamation plants epicenters of resource recovery.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so I have two questions. The first one is directly related to the meeting tonight, and that is, has anyone thought that maybe now is the time to actually reverse the flow of the Chicago River, actually back into Lake Michigan the way it was before? And the second question, which is more a state of Illinois question, is with the agricultural community, we have intensive, all the farmers are tiling all their fields. So you have this tremendous amount of fresh water, which is, instead of going into the groundwater, is now going into the Mississippi and down into the Gulf of Mexico, and all of this is being wasted, as we've talked about a lot. So is there any study being done? Is there anything that can be done about all this tile drainage water that is being wasted? Those are my two questions.
So yes, it's been proposed by a number of people to reverse the flow of the Chicago River. And there's, I think, two underlying principles. One is to separate these water bodies that historically were separate. And the second major driver is to prevent migration of invasive species, right? Now, the nutrient issues in terms of agriculture in Illinois are very different. So if we compare Lake Michigan versus Lake Erie, in Lake Erie you have a lot of nutrient input into the lake that contribute to this growth of these harmful algae. Here, our agricultural system naturally drains to the Mississippi. So the nutrients that come from fertilizers that run off from that tile drain system goes to the Gulf of Mexico and causes major problems with eutrophication there. So that's a national issue, but it's really not a state issue because the effects are not here.
We actually, in Oregon, my colleague Christina Negri, who I don't know if I see her in the audience or not, is actually working directly with farmers on that question. So we're working with farmers in very mature areas in central Illinois, who are typically corn farmers. And what we're doing is we are plotting very hydroscopic plants, so plants that want to suck up a lot of water in regions where, with tiling, we have collection of a lot of nutrients. The idea there is that we're using the water and we're using from the fertilizer the collected nutrients to grow something beneficial. So we're doing things like willow trees, which will absorb as much water as you can give them, and using that as a biomass source that will eventually be an energy source. So we are working directly with farmers in that, and we're doing it at the field level. And the next step is we're looking, how do we do it more at a watershed level?
I have a quick statement and one question, and that is several years ago when the World Future Society met here, there was a young lady who had a green architectural practice. And she had this plan to convert all the east-west streets in Chicago to vegetation strips or green strips. And then the storm runoff would go into those strips, they would be purified, and it would end up back in the lake. That I don't know what that would do with the traffic patterns. But anyway, for Jeff, I wanted to ask, if we started generating more electricity from renewable sources like wind and solar, that should reduce the demand for this thermoelectric cooling water, right?
You know, the expectation is that, you know, the more you have wind and solar, the less you would need for thermoelectric cooling. But that's still well under 10%.
Yeah.
And without going into details, in the Southwest, solar is basically at grid prices, and in the Midwest it is. But we still have challenges with the way the grid works, where we generate, and electricity is not essentially where we use it, and we still need to upgrade the grid, and that's in process. So the expectation is that we will have base load capacity, which will be nuclear. Coal has been declining rapidly, natural gas, because we need a base load capacity to reliably run a grid. And they will need, whether anything that goes through a heat source will use that water. The actual volume of water we need for thermoelectric is declining slightly, but it's not dropping, going away. So it will be a major issue for, you know, a generation or two away, that we will need that water supply.
Is he going to fix? Okay. My name is Judy Beck, and I have a question. You did a wonderful job on showing slides with a historical perspective, the natural perspective, and then the engineered perspective. But the slide that was missing, and I think it's a complicating factor, is that those watersheds are made up of many local units of government. And they make a lot of decisions that affect all of the issues that you're talking about. Now, that might mean that you could answer a couple of questions or have some suggestions tonight, but it also might mean that we need another whole forum to just talk about that particular map of a watershed with all the units of local government.
Whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting, and that's where that comes from. But no, that is definitely, and it's actually more of a complication in the West. Policy in water is actually a really big challenge. I interact a lot with the University of Chicago, with the economics department, and they keep telling me just price water appropriately when it'll flow to the correct markets. I said, okay, price water appropriately. I mean, that is a very big hurdle because everybody owns water, but nobody owns water at the same time. And it is a real challenge there. And that's something I have not figured out. As I think about what a real research program will look around water, they absolutely will have a critical policy component where it will include, you know, social scientists as well as economists, but it will also include non-governmental agencies as foundations. How do we solve this problem? It's not hard, it's really hard.
Just to amplify that, the early slides and the history is Chicago is a low-lying, swampy, mucky area. The 28-mile distance of the sanitary and ship canal from the south branch of the Chicago River to where it joins the Des Plaines River near Lockport, the elevation drop is less than 6 feet. That's no downhill. So we can talk about trying to move water somewhere else when we experience flooding, but there's nowhere for it to flow to. That's part of the challenge. And in terms of separation of the watersheds, the whole system that has been built, we've raised the city, as Aaron said, but the system has been plumbed to flow away from the lake. So it would have to include some measures to avoid inundating the city and suburbs because of that fateful decision 125 years ago.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Silverstein. I have a friend who is the safety manager at a nuclear power plant, and I asked him about all the water that is used for thermoelectric generation. And he shrugged and said, we don't use any water. We extract some water from the river to cool our plant, and then we put it right back in. So I was wondering if you could respond to that, please.
So that's true. So water, in terms of primary extraction, is used for thermoelectric power plant cooling, and it's returned. But it's changed. So typically it's warmer, and in places where you have sensitive fish species, that can be a big issue. I think a bigger issue here is that all of this energy infrastructure is built specifically for fixed water levels. And the real challenge, if we have things like dropping water levels regionally, then you may not be able to take in water to cool those plants anymore. You may not be able to take in water for drinking water supply as well. So I think it's important to appreciate how much we have built up over the last 150 years that assumes that we're going to have water at the level that it's been. And that's the real challenge.
And at the temperature.
Oh, that's true. For heat transfer, for cooling, if the water is warmer, then the process is less efficient. So it also assumes that we'll have water at the temperature that it's been in the past.
All right, that's all the time we have at the moment for audience questions. Are we still planning on doing the panel conversation?
Sure.
Okay, there will be time to ask the panelists more questions at the very end.
All right. I was asked to prepare some questions, and I will, and so I did, I should say. Tell us, Aaron, tell us about Northwestern and what it's doing in water.
So Northwestern, of course, is a premier university, and it has very broad capability between engineering, sciences, and humanities. So there's an opportunity to have a very broad set of programs to address the scientific aspects of water, to develop technologies, to deploy them, to commercialize them, and to address the broad societal issues. So working with partners in the region, we hope to develop a regional center of excellence to inform our future decisions for use of water and to develop technologies that enables better use of water.
Debra, would you like to discuss, or you've really described MWRT well. So I think we know that. What is your vision? Where are we be in 5 years? Where are we going to be in a generation?
Well, in 5 years, I think you'll see a number of these resource recovery initiatives up and running at the Water Reclamation District, and I hope it will begin transforming how we manage food waste. The looming issue for this agency is stormwater management and flooding. And these more intense rain events that we're seeing that I believe are a symptom of climate change that overwhelm the capacity of any local sewer system to convey that water to the deep tunnel and to the larger reservoirs. So how we try to manage the changing nature of rainstorms is, I think, going to be a key thing. I think you may see some innovation in terms of distributed networks of rain capture systems, somewhere between a rain barrel and a larger reservoir. And that's where I hope we'll see innovation. And then reuse of gray water, both at residential sites and industrial sites.
And a generation from now, we're going to...
Chicago will be nature's metropolis for the 21st century, the thriving city on a Great Lake.
So, okay, Aaron, I'm going to ask you a question which I didn't prepare. Some of these are canned questions that I prepared. We are both researchers, and we live off of, and die off of getting research dollars. I just gave you a $5 million grant.
Good. Yeah.
What are you going to do?
So that's an interesting question. So
I always go rogue.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of major needs. I think we really need to understand better what is the current impact of cities like Chicago on the ecosystems of the Great Lakes, particularly the microbials. So Seth, you had at the end of your talk something on gene sequencing. This is new technology that hasn't been used. So we're talking here more than 100 years of growth of cities along the Great Lakes. And I think we really need to know exactly what that has done and then what is the prospect for the future. So understanding what the true risks are for things like waterborne disease along the lake and down the river systems. In addition to that, I think we need to look at some landscape scale planning processes, that how we can do things in non-traditional ways in terms of integrating green infrastructure. That is, things that are green and not things that are constructed. So this could be ecological preserves, it could be food production, it could be many other things that could have multiple benefits. Everything we've done until this point has been for single purposes. So if we could find a way to integrate things for multiple purposes that would involve more living structures, these green corridors, for example, that were mentioned, I think we could see a lot of benefit, and we don't have the tools to be able to make projections for that right now.
Completely different question, but this was one of the key questions. I talk a lot about water and the relationship, and I think Debra, you're the leading spokesman in the area. How do we convince our neighbors of what's the right way to manage water? You're doing that on your own, but how do we convince 1,000 people to do that?
People have become more aware of water scarcity and water issues, I think, when they have it backing up in their basements or when their street is flooded, and possibly when they see the pictures of Hurricane Sandy or Katrina or water or people in Lake Toledo not being able to drink their water. But we are in the catbird seat. And the challenge for us here, as my good friend Cam Davis has said, is to bust the notion of infinitude. The lake is vast, and it seems infinite. And we have grown up and been so successful with our water and sewer infrastructure that very few of us have ever had the experience of turning on a faucet and having no water come out. And so it is a big challenge. But I think people are learning more and becoming more sophisticated, and it takes leadership, people talking about it.
Slightly different question, and then we'll go back to the audience. Aaron, you have a pointer on every slide where you get the information. Debra, you're a wealth of knowledge about the subject. We have an educated audience who may not be experts on water. Where should they turn if they want to learn more?
So there are a lot of resources. I'll just name a few. In terms of this region and some studies that have done about water supply and capacity, the Metropolitan Planning Council had put out a report a couple of years ago called Before the Wells Run Dry. The Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning has done a number of reports on water. I particularly like Denver Water, which has a lot of very useful tips and information at denverwater.org. There they have a system you can sign up for monthly recorded messages on your phone or email about water conservation. And finally, the Field Museum had a water exhibition with a lot of highlights, and you can get some information off of their website.
So I would add one thing to that, which is that there have also been a number of national and international programs studying a lot of these issues. The issues we're facing here are experienced over large parts of the United States, and some places have much worse problems than we have. And so there have been a number of major programs by the National Science Foundation, U.S. Geological Survey, National Weather Service, and others. And so you can find websites of these scientific studies, highly reputable. You can find lots of information.
And a book actually I had purchased 15 years ago, but it's actually sat on my bookshelf and never read. Debra pointed out to me, Cronin, Nature's Metropolis, and it's actually now right in my short list with one or two other books that I'll be getting to.
Well, in that vein, I'll recommend one of the best books I've read in recent years called The Big Thirst by Charles Fishman. The subtitle is The Secret Life and Turbulent Future of Water. He believes that we've lived through the golden age of water, when three characteristics were all present at the same time, at least in the developed world, that water was cheap, abundant, and safe, and that no longer will all three of those characteristics be present at the same time in our fractious water future. I want to ask you all a question, and that is, as I'm trying to work on reuse of treated water and try to imagine the water-intensive industries of the future that we might attract here, close to our treatment plants, help me think of what those might be, because I want to jump ahead and crowdsource the imaginative potential of all of you. So please send me all your ideas and thoughts.
Maybe we want to move back to some audience questions for a few minutes.
I would like to ask, back based on the earlier question, when you talked about the reversal of the Chicago River, how credible is it from both an economic and
You mean to re-reverse it?
Correct.
It could be done. There's no question that it could be done. But we don't really know what the effects of that would be. So I think before we make such a major choice, we should really understand what the consequences of that would be.
And is it actually being studied?
Yes.
Yes, and one of the things, the study that Oregon is doing with the district on the microbial populations, we started that a year before they installed disinfection, and the plan is to monitor for at least 5 years after they do disinfection. So we're going to have a background, and then we'll have performance. Is the treatment working? We don't know what the answer will be yet, but that's why we wanted a background done in advance, and we think it'll provide good information so we can make the right decisions. There's always, we don't know how much contamination will be in the riverbed as an example. So that is a study that we'll actually see the performance in probably within a year of after they install disinfection.
Okay, I'm Charles Derringer. I'm the coordinator of the Thorn Creek Watershed Sustainability Project. It was mentioned before about watersheds. Now, in our watershed, which is just south of Chicago, we have the largest drainage district, which is similar to Chicago. It's only 28 miles long, but we're talking about water reuse, and there's a wonderful water reuse project right out here by DeKalb in Cortland. So, I mean, we have some water reuse projects that Dr. Schaefer, the creator of the Clean Water Act, has developed, and I think we need to look at smaller scale projects that are already in operation and efficient, and I think we need to continue several more symposiums. Besides, I also am the field person for the watershed mapping tool, which is, I think, the best in the nation, provided by the University of Illinois, and I'll give you the website. It shows all the watersheds in the state of Illinois, and it's 60 layers of GIS information, which helps communities figure out how to do good things with their watersheds and efficiently. And the initials are rmms.illinois.edu, and it runs with Google Chrome, and I want you to try it. It's awesome. Thank you.
I agree. Starting small on infrastructure projects is the right way to go in just about every industry. You learn before you waste a lot of money.
Hi, I'm Claire Lowe. I'm an undergrad at Northwestern Engineering. I was wondering, regarding reclamation of water for industrial non-potable use, is this something you envision as ultimately being incorporated to municipal wastewater treatment facilities, or something that could be incorporated on site at facilities so that they can ultimately have like a self-sustaining water cycle?
Do they do it right on site, or do they pipe the water?
Is the future in centralized facilities or decentralized for wastewater recovery and reuse?
The future in developing areas, I believe, would be for decentralized wastewater treatment. I don't think you'll see the kind of very large centralized treatment plants that we built here in Cook County. But that's the system we have here. In terms of reuse, again, the further out you go, you need to lay more pipe, and that's what's costly. So I see the attraction being in a radius fairly close to the treatment plants.
Hi, my name is Lynn Schmidt. I work for Cook County Department of Environmental Control. And last June, Illinois became the first state to ban microbeads in cosmetics. And for the record, I find these in I have a home water filter, like a pitcher. I find these in my water pitcher all the time. So I'm just wondering if you guys know of any research that's being done to study the effects of the microbeads in the water, or how much microbeads are in the water.
So yes, so there have been a number of studies that have been supported on that. Some of them have been in the Chicago area, for example, by my colleague John Kelly at University of Loyola. Those are complicated problems because you're talking about materials that really haven't been present before, and it's very hard to imagine exactly what the effects could be. So it's very kind of complex, multi-component problem that will require a long time to get a complete answer.
I mean, I don't know much about the issue. I know what Michael Hawthorne wrote in the Tribune. That's not an area I've ever worked.
I would say more broadly, we're running kind of a number of experiments and releasing these materials that we don't know what their effects are, broadly speaking, human health or ecosystems or water, or how to remove them. And that, broadly speaking, is a concern, precisely because we don't know what they're going to do. So this is something going forward I think we're probably going to need to get a better handle on and understand what the effects are in ecosystems, how we might remove them before we make widespread releases.
Good evening. I'm Paul Vogel with Grilly and Hansen. We've been headquartered here a century in Chicago, helping solve problems that you're discussing tonight. Commissioner Shore, Professor Packman, Seth, great stuff. I want to talk about opportunity, and I'm interested in hearing about the opportunities you see with all the technology people in this room of figuring out how water becomes an economic driver in our region to create jobs, build the food market that we need, and actually help improve people's lives. So I'd really be interested in your vision for the future.
Thank you, Paul. I do think with energy costs, with global political turbulence, with a host of other factors, there were industries that moved away from the Midwest for a variety of reasons, because labor costs were less in other parts of the country. Carpet manufacturers moved to the Southeast because of ample water and lower labor costs. Well, guess what? Atlanta was within about 2 weeks of having no water just a couple of years ago, and I believe they have only about a 2-week supply in their reservoirs. That equation is going to change as water scarcity in other parts of the world and parts of this country make some industries vulnerable. We saw that from the Davos quote. And so it just makes sense that if you're in an industry that needs a guaranteed water supply, you're going to look to where there are those. And we have a skilled labor force. We're a great transit center. That's how Chicago became great. And so how do we think about this availability as a strategic asset and as the foundation of an economy going forward? Textiles moved overseas for cheap labor, but the cost now someday, because of fuel and the needing safe shipping zones and so forth to ship heavy textiles back, may change. I'm just speculating here, but how do we think about those future industries that we can attract?
In our vision, we don't have that answer yet. That's why we're putting that vision together now. And Aaron and I, who work at research organizations, we say for this type of economy to work, what is the technologies that needs and what is the research needs that goes into it? So we're doing an analysis of that. And I don't think it comes down to the price of water. It's $3.50 in Chicago and it's $4.50 somewhere else. It comes down to, will you have that reliable supply that will last the life of, if you're going to put a plant in that you expect to use for 40 years, can you get a performance guarantee that you'll have water for 40 years? I think in Chicago, we will be able to say that, whereas I'm not sure we'll be able to say that in Phoenix or in other places like that. So it's a matter of how you think about deploying your capital, how long you expect to use it, and that becomes a driver. So it's not going to be a quick process. This is why we're doing the detail analysis now. And then if this is where the industry is, you want the technologies to advance the industry locally to move that along, and that's where the research institutions come into play. And we certainly see Greeley and Hansen as a critical part of the whole infrastructure.
Good evening. Fantastic talks, by the way. I'm a postdoc at the University of Chicago. My name's Chris Argus. And I heard a talk once by Nate Lewis from Caltech. Maybe you've heard it before, called Powering the Planet. And he talks about energy as the only great problem to be worked on. And so at the end of his talk, I thought, I asked him, what about water, right? Energy and water, their fates are intertwined. And he basically told me, well, if you're producing cheap, abundant, and green energy, then water's really not a problem because we have all this energy not contributing to climate change, then we can use it for treating water and distributing it. And so I wanted to get your perspective on that thought.
So my feeling on that is that's a dream. Okay, because there's no established technology or even any technology that is on the table that would let us produce infinite amounts of fresh water at will. We don't really produce water, we just clean water. So we need to make sure that there's access to good water supplies. We're talking global processes, redistribution of water through weather events over the whole Earth. These are things that we cannot fix through pumping more energy into them.
And by the way, Nate Lewis, who's at Caltech, he's the scientific director for a place called the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis, which is a big leading department of energy hub, it's called, for solar fuels. So he's a very well-respected person in the field. I don't think, as Aaron would say, that we have free energy or we ever will have free energy. We want to have affordable energy with the right environmental impact. But if you look at two things, one is that even at whatever cost of the energy, we have multiple uses for it. Transporting water over long distance for pumping is thermodynamic. It will take a certain amount of energy unless you're going downhill. And so that will be that. And if you look at the thermodynamics of desalination, we can maybe make it a little cheaper, but you will always have a big energy burden because removing 30,000 parts per million of salt from water is thermodynamically you require a lot of energy, and we're not very far from that thermodynamic efficiency. Wastewater, which has much lower salt levels, can actually be significantly lower energy costs. And we can optimize around there because you have significantly lower salt in there, so it will always take less energy to recover wastewater than do desalination of seawater.
It's important to remember that while water is a renewable resource, it's also a finite resource, and that what most of us and other creatures need is water that's fresh and clean. Increasingly, we live in a world that has water that's salty and dirty. The other thing to remember is that humans not only need water for our survival and capture a lot of it in our bodies, but we need it for the food we eat, and we are in a planet of a growing population. So you're going to have 1 or 2 billion more water vessels walking around, holding some of that water in our bodies and requiring it for our survival that weren't here before. And the whole issue and topic of population management is not even on the table in most of our discussions, but it involves water management.
And in terms of moving fluids or liquids, as a thought experiment, the U.S. uses about 135 billion gallons of gasoline a year. I don't know the exact number. How much fluid goes through one of Debra's treatment plants, Stickney? It's double, at least, or more than double the actual fluid flow of gasoline through our whole economy through one of her plants. So that volume issue in moving liquids does take energy. So we can't think without thinking about how we manage water.
But I think it can also emphasize, right, that this water issue, this reusing water, this finite resources, we are going to need clean energy, right? I mean, that's paramount. I mean, I think the previous question earlier about how energy intensive it is to treat water. I mean, it's no good to burn a bunch of coal, right? To put CO2 in the atmosphere to clean water, right? I mean, so it's the two problems are intertwined, and you can't separate the other end. They both rely upon each other, I think. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all for your great questions. Unfortunately, I've already ran quite a bit over.
Can we get, I want to hear what Rob wants to ask.
All right, well, if it's quick.
Rob Jacob from Oregon National Lab. One thing that I'm not sure I heard mentioned, another kind of misfeature of our system is the fact that both the stormwater from rain and the water from sewage go into the same pipe. And is there any talk about having to reverse that as a way of better treating our water?
Well, I mean, that has been done some places. That was done in Evanston, for example. But if you look at citywide or regionally, it's just enormously expensive and difficult. So it's a matter of where you want to put your money, where you want to make your investments.
If you live along Crawford Avenue, it's being done right now. So, I mean, the question that Rob was saying was separating we have combined sewage, so the storm and the sewage water, the same thing. It increases costs, but you'd have to double the infrastructure costs and all. And these were put in 100 years ago, so it's not something you just do offhand.
Right, so Chicago and 50 of the older suburbs have combined sewer systems. So the pipe running down the middle of your street that collects wastewater from your home, toilets, dishwashers, showers, also collects the rainwater that goes down the street drain. It may be that a few years from now, the separated sewers, by the way, have a separate storm sewer that conveys rainwater directly to a nearby river or stream. It may be that combined sewers are actually better for environmental health, for stream health, because those storm sewers have the rain running over the street, collecting salt, oil, contaminants, usually warmer, and usually entering a stream in a much more velocity than the water that comes out of a sewage treatment plant that's at a constant temperature and constant flow, and where we're able to remove some of the contaminants. So someday it may be that combined sewers, if you can manage the flow, are better for aquatic life and stream health.
By the way, Rob is one of the region's leading climate scientists, and I thought we were going to get a completely different question. I would have said thank you very much. All right. All right. I think we need to close up. Norm, do you have any closing remarks?
No, I just want to, number one, thank C2ST for hosting just a great evening, and thank all of you for a very lively discussion, for your participation, and also thank you, Debra, Aaron, and Seth.